It started with silence, but not the comfortable kind. The kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket. No, this silence was razor sharp, electric, the kind that cuts through a television studio like a blade through glass. Whoopi Goldberg sat frozen in her chair, her eyes blinking too rapidly, her signature confidence nowhere to be found. Her co-hosts exchanged tight, worried glances across the table, their usual banter replaced by an uncomfortable stillness that seemed to press against the walls. The audience, just moments before buzzing with anticipation and scattered laughter, was now dead silent, as if collectively holding their breath. And there, standing calmly under the harsh glare of the studio lights, was Elon Musk, his hand casually adjusting the collar of his dark blazer, a slight smile playing at the corner of his mouth. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't flustered or scrambling for words. He was something far more dangerous in a room built for chaos, completely calculated. You could feel the tension breathing in the air, thick and suffocating. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every nervous shift, every moment of this unscripted reality playing out in real time. Social media notifications were already pinging off the charts, but nobody in that studio was thinking about hashtags or viral moments. They were witnessing something else entirely, a reckoning. The kind that happens when someone who's spent years building the future meets someone who's made a career out of tearing things down. And, as the internet would later say, Silicon Valley just schooled daytime television, and his name was Elon. But before this moment that would break the internet and send every tech blog scrambling for headlines, something smaller happened. Something that seemed almost innocent at first glance. It began with an email, a carefully crafted invitation that landed in Elon's inbox on a Tuesday morning. We'd love to have you join us for a thoughtful discussion on innovation and social responsibility in modern America, the producers of The View wrote. The subject line read, "An important conversation," in that polished professional font that screams corporate media. But Elon's team knew better. They'd been watching the patterns, studying the setups, analyzing the way The View operated like a well-oiled machine designed to create moments, not conversations. "This feels like a trap," one of his communications directors muttered, scrolling through recent clips of the show on her laptop. Whoopi's been sharpening that sarcasm for 2 decades. She doesn't invite tech CEOs to have friendly chats about innovation. She invites them to get sound bites. They want you to crack under pressure, to give them that viral moment where the billionaire loses his cool. The room fell quiet as his team exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen it happen before. Other executives, other entrepreneurs, other visionaries who walked onto that stage, thinking they were going to have a reasonable discussion about their work, only to find themselves in a verbal boxing match they never signed up for. But Elon just smiled, that calm, measured expression that had become his signature in boardrooms and congressional hearings alike. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and said quietly, "Then I won't give them a crack to exploit. I'll give them a foundation they can't shake." What he didn't say, but felt deep in his bones, was this: sometimes the best way to handle a storm is to become the eye of it. To stay so centered, so grounded in truth, that everything else spins around you while you remain unmoved. By the time the announcement hit social media that Elon would be appearing on The View, the internet was already fracturing into predictable camps. Liberal voices questioned the decision with posts like, "Why is The View platforming someone who thinks he can solve the world's problems with rockets and robots?" Conservative circles fired back with warnings. "They're setting him up for an ambush. Watch how they try to make innovation look like arrogance." Tech enthusiasts were split between excitement and anxiety, flooding comment sections with everything from, "Finally, someone who can talk about real progress," to, "This is going to be painful to watch." But Elon wasn't there for the political theater. He wasn't there to score points for any particular side, or to feed the endless cycle of outrage and counter-outrage that had become America's default mode of discourse. He was there for something else entirely. For the kids watching at home who dreamed of building something bigger than themselves. For the young engineers who stayed up late, sketching designs for a better world. For the entrepreneurs who'd been told their ideas were too crazy, too ambitious, too impossible. He was there for the in-between people, the ones who got forgotten when the cameras started rolling and the talking points took over. And here's the moment we want to hear from you. If you believe that innovation and genuine progress still matter in today's world, we want you to hit that like button and comment the number 7. Let us know if you've ever been mocked for thinking differently, for dreaming bigger, for believing that the impossible might just be possible. Because this story isn't just about Elon or Whoopi. It's about every single person who's ever been laughed at for daring to imagine a future that doesn't exist yet. It's about every inventor who's been called crazy, every entrepreneur who's been told to be realistic, every dreamer who's been asked to explain why they can't just be satisfied with the way things are. This is for everyone who's ever stood in a room full of skeptics and refused to back down from their vision. The opening pleasantries were polite enough, scripted in that practiced way that daytime television has perfected over decades. Whoopi flashed her signature smile, the one that had charmed audiences for years, but there was something calculating behind her eyes, like a chess player already thinking 3 moves ahead. Elon took his seat with that characteristic calm, settling into the chair as if he owned the room, not through arrogance, but through a quiet confidence that seemed to emanate from someone who had spent years turning impossible ideas into reality. The conversation started safe. Predictable questions about Tesla's latest models, SpaceX's recent launches, the usual surface-level topics that let everyone stay comfortable. But then, the temperature shifted. You could feel it like a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Whoopi's smile turned sharper, more predatory, and she leaned forward slightly, the way a cat does before it pounces. "So, Elon," she began, her tone still light, but with an edge that cut through the studio's air conditioning. "You're still playing Rocket Man while people can't afford groceries? Must be nice living in your sci-fi fantasy while the rest of us deal with the real world." The audience gave that nervous laughter, the kind that happens when people aren't sure if they're supposed to find something funny or uncomfortable. A few people shifted in their seats, sensing that this wasn't going to be the friendly chat they'd expected when they got their tickets. Elon didn't blink. He didn't fidget, or reach for his water glass, or do any of the things people usually do when they're caught off guard. Instead, he sat perfectly still for a moment, processing, calculating, the way his engineers described him doing in those critical seconds before a rocket launch, when every variable has to be perfect. "I'm not playing anything, Whoopi," he said, his voice steady and measured, carrying the weight of someone who had heard this criticism 1,000 times before. "I'm building the future that your grandchildren will inherit. And I'm doing it because someone has to." The room stirred, not the polite stirring of an audience following a script, but the organic movement of people who had just heard something unexpected. Someone in the 3rd row leaned forward. A woman near the back whispered something to her friend. You could see the moment when the energy began to shift, when what had started as entertainment began to feel like something more substantial. But Whoopi wasn't done. She had come prepared for this, had her talking points lined up like ammunition. "Oh, so now you're saving humanity?" she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How convenient. Build some rockets, tweet some memes, and suddenly, you're the savior of mankind. Must be exhausting being so important." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife, designed to make him look foolish, to reduce his life's work to a punchline for daytime television. And that's when it happened. The moment that would be replayed millions of times, analyzed by media experts, and quoted in business schools. Elon leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, but with a kind of focused intensity that happens when someone stops playing defense and starts playing chess. "No, Whoopi," he said, his voice quiet but carrying perfectly through the studio's sound system. "I'm not saving humanity. I'm giving humanity options. There's a difference between dreaming and doing. I dream, then I build. Most people just dream, and then mock those who dare to make it real. The words landed like a precision strike. Not shouted, not performative, just devastatingly accurate. A few people in the audience actually gasped. You could hear it clearly, that sharp intake of breath that happens when someone says exactly what everyone was thinking, but nobody had the courage to voice. One man in the third row whispered, "Whoa," just loud enough for his microphone to pick up. From the control room, a camera operator turned to his colleague and mouthed, "He's flipping this whole thing." The producer in the booth leaned forward, suddenly realizing that what they had planned as a simple takedown was becoming something entirely different. Whoopi's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that most people missed it, but the cameras caught it. That moment of uncertainty, of someone who had just realized that the person sitting across from them wasn't going to play by the usual rules. The audience could feel it too, that shift in power that happens when someone refuses to be the victim of someone else's narrative. Whoopi tried to regain control, her voice rising just enough to signal that she was still the host, still in charge. "Must be easy to talk about the future when you're worth billions," she said, leaning back in her chair with that practiced look of skepticism she'd perfected over years of interviewing politicians and celebrities. Hard to relate to regular people when you're flying around in private jets and buying social media companies for fun. The audience murmured, some nodding along, others looking uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. But Elon didn't take the bait. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled, not the polished media smile, but something genuine, almost nostalgic. "You know what, Whoopi? You're right. I do have billions now. But I also slept on couches when I was building my first company. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for weeks because I couldn't afford anything else. I nearly lost everything multiple times, not because I was reckless, but because I was betting on ideas that everyone said were impossible." His voice stayed calm, conversational, but there was steel underneath it. "The difference between us is that when I had nothing, I built something. When I had something, I built more. And when people told me it couldn't be done, I did it anyway." The room shifted again. You could see it in people's faces, the way they were processing this unexpected vulnerability mixed with quiet strength. A woman in the front row nodded slowly. A young man with a laptop bag at his feet sat up straighter. But Whoopi wasn't finished. She pulled out her next weapon, the one that had worked so well on other guests who dared to challenge her narrative. "You tweet like a teenager having a meltdown," she said, her voice sharper now, more desperate. "For someone who's supposed to be so brilliant, you sure do a lot of complaining on social media." The audience chuckled, but it was thinner this time, less convinced. Elon's response was swift and surgical. "I communicate directly because the media filters truth into entertainment," he said, looking directly at her. "When I tweet, people get my actual thoughts, not someone's interpretation of what they think I meant to say. You call it complaining. I call it transparency. Maybe that's the problem with traditional media. You've forgotten what unfiltered communication looks like." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Whoopi's co-hosts seemed to shrink back slightly, suddenly very interested in their note cards. From somewhere in the audience, you could hear someone whisper, "He's absolutely right." Another voice, clearer now, said, "Finally, someone who gets it." Whoopi's attempts at humor were falling flat now, her usual rhythm disrupted by someone who refused to dance to her tune. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and everyone in the room could feel it. The moment came quietly, without fanfare or dramatic music. Elon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, not to tweet or escape, but to show something. "You want to know what really drives me?" he asked, his voice softer now, more personal. "My son asked me last week why the sky is brown sometimes. Not blue, brown. Because of pollution. And I realized I could give him a scientific explanation. Or I could give him a world where that question doesn't need to be asked. He paused, letting the words settle over the room like a blanket. I'm not trying to be a hero, Whoopi. I'm trying to be a good ancestor. When my kids look back at this moment in history, I want them to say their dad tried to leave them something better, not just something bigger. The studio fell completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. A woman in the audience dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Whoopi's expression changed, the first crack in her armor of skepticism. You talk about rockets and robots like they're toys, Elon continued. But they're not. They're tools. Tools to clean the air my children breathe, to give them options when Earth gets too crowded, to make sure they inherit possibility, not just problems. The weight of his words filled the room. This wasn't about ego or billionaire fantasies. This was about legacy, about love, about the kind of responsibility that comes with having the power to change things. And everyone could feel it. Whoopi made one last desperate attempt to regain control, her voice taking on that mocking tone that had worked so well for decades. So you're the savior of humanity now? She said, throwing her hands up in exaggerated disbelief. With your rockets and robots and tweets, you're going to fix everything the rest of us mere mortals can't figure out? The room tensed. Even her co-hosts looked uncomfortable. This felt different from her usual sharp wit. This felt cruel. Elon's response was quiet, but devastating. I'm not a savior, Whoopi. I'm an engineer. And engineers don't solve problems by talking about them. We solve them by building solutions, testing them, failing, and building better ones. The difference between engineers and critics is that engineers create possibilities. Critics just explain why things can't be done. That's when Whoopi crossed the line. Maybe some problems don't need your kind of solutions, she snapped, her mask finally slipping completely. Maybe some of us are tired of being told we need saving by people who think money can buy wisdom. The audience gasped. A few people actually recoiled in their seats. And then came Elon's defining moment, the line that would be quoted for years to come. The world doesn't need fewer solutions, Whoopi. It needs more people brave enough to attempt them. And it needs fewer people who mistake cynicism for wisdom. Suddenly, a young woman in the audience stood up. I'm studying engineering because of people like him, she said, her voice shaking but determined. I'm tired of being told to be realistic. Maybe we need more unrealistic people. Whoopi tried to call for a commercial break, but the director didn't cut. This was too real, too raw, too important to interrupt. Elon stood slowly, not in anger or protest, but to address the camera directly. If you've ever been told your ideas are too big, too crazy, too impossible, he said, looking straight into the lens, this moment is for you. The future isn't built by people who accept limitations. It's built by people who refuse to believe in them. The audience began to rise, one by one, row by row, not with thunderous applause, but with something more powerful, respectful silence. The kind of standing ovation reserved for moments that change people, not just entertain them. Elon walked toward Whoopi, extending his hand. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, he said quietly. I came because I thought we were going to talk about building something better. Whoopi looked up at him, and for the first time in the entire segment, dropped her guard completely. I think I forgot that mocking someone's dreams doesn't make them smaller, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It makes us smaller. The future belongs to builders, not breakers, Elon replied, his tone gentle but firm. There's room for both of us in that future, but only if we choose to build it together. A producer rushed onto the stage with a tablet, showing a tweet that was already going viral. Watching Elon Musk just inspired me to apply for engineering school. I'm 45 and thought it was too late. It's not. The numbers were climbing. 50,000 retweets, 200,000 likes, and thousands of comments from people sharing their own dreams and ambitions. Within minutes of the show ending, social media exploded. "Elon just gave a masterclass in handling criticism," one tweet read. "Innovation just won over mockery," said another. The hashtag #Build Don't Break was trending worldwide within the hour. Backstage, crew members were still processing what they'd witnessed. "That wasn't a TV show," one camera operator said. "That was a cultural moment." The producer, who had rushed the tablet on stage, was fielding calls from every major network, all wanting to know how they could create similar moments of authentic dialogue. Whoopi sat quietly in her dressing room, not angry or embarrassed, but reflective. She stared at herself in the mirror and whispered, "Maybe it's time I started building people up instead of tearing them down." Meanwhile, Elon declined interview requests from CNN, Fox News, and every major outlet. "The conversation spoke for itself," he told his team. "I don't need to add commentary to truth." The real impact came in the days that followed. Engineering program applications spiked 300%. Young entrepreneurs started posting videos of their inventions with the hashtag #Build Don't Break. A 12-year-old girl in Ohio started a science club called Future Builders that spread to schools across the country. But perhaps most importantly, the tone of public discourse began to shift, even slightly. People started asking different questions. Instead of, "Why won't this work?" they asked, "How could we make this work?" Instead of mocking ambitious ideas, they started celebrating them. In a world that had grown addicted to tearing down dreamers, one conversation reminded millions of people that the future belongs to those who build it, not those who mock it. They didn't invite him to change minds, but that's what happened anyway. And sometimes, that's exactly what the world needs. Not another argument, but a better example.